Welcome to the Sort It Out SI League Guide for Mexico, where we'll look at the league structure within Football Manager 2023 and run through a few save ideas if you want to start your career in Mexico. Let's go and have a look. On FM23, Mexico has 2 playable divisions with 36 playable teams. Now, Mexico in typical Central American fashion, takes influence from their neighbours from both the north and the south with their league structure. So the season itself is split in half with 2 tournaments, an opening and a closing tournament, very similar to most of the leagues down in South America, but there is also the inclusion of a playoff at the end of each of those tournaments to decide the champions for each one. So during both the Apertura and the Clausura phases, so the opening and closing phases of the season, you play each of the other 17 teams once in the Liga MX and in the Liga de Expansion MX, but we'll cover that one properly in a second, during each of the 2 tournaments. Now, the top 12 teams make it through to the Liguilla, or the playoffs of each tournament, with the top 4 being seeded and automatically making it through to the quarterfinals, whilst the remaining 8 teams, so 5th down to 12th, enter a reclassification or repechage play-in round over a single leg hosted by the higher ranked team. Now, once we enter the quarterfinals, the knockouts are played over 2 legs, including the final, with the winner winning either the Torneo Apertura or the Torneo Clausura, depending on whether it's the opening or the closing tournament, and both tournaments have the same format. Are you still with me? Yes, good. Okay, there's more. So, if 2 different teams win the Apertura and the Clausura, they will face in the following season's opening game the Campeón de Campeones, which is like the Community Shield in England, but it's a match basically to determine the overall champion. Now, the winner of that match then faces the reigning Major League Soccer champion from America, and I believe it's the MLS Cup winner in this instance, and they face off in the Campeones Cup, which is Mexico against America. I think it's hosted in America every single season. But basically, if the same team, however, wins the Apertura and the Clausura, as was the case in the 21-22 season that's finished earlier this year, they're automatically crowned the Campeón de Campeones because they don't have to face anyone else because they've won both tournaments. Excellent. Right then, we've touched on the USA and Canada through the MLS, and the Campeones Cup is not the only competition that's shared between Mexico and the MLS. So all 18 Liga MX clubs and all 29 MLS clubs face off in the Leagues Cup. Leagues with an S on the end. It's not the Carabao Cup. It's the Leagues Cup. So from 2023 onwards, the 47-team competition will begin, and that's the reigning Liga MX and MLS winners. So that's depending on, there's an aggregate table of the Apertura and the Clausura, depending on which one of the winners has got more points over the full regular season, if that makes sense. They get a bye, as do the MLS winners, and I think in this instance it's the Supporters' Shield, so the regular season best record for the MLS. They automatically qualify for the round of 32 anyway. So that's 2 teams into the round of 32. The remaining 45 teams are then split across 15 groups of 3. And I believe it's second place in the aggregate table in the Liga MX faces 15th place in the, or 16th place in the MLS. Basically, they link like that, and then the remaining teams get chucked in the rest of the group as well. Very confusing. So there are 15 teams from... you with me? So there's 15 groups of 3, basically, and they play each other once, and the top 2 go to the knockout, so go into the round of 32. And then it's a straight knockout round all the way through to the final, and where the 2 finalists and the winner of the 3rd place playoff, they all get a berth into the CONCACAF Champions League, unless they've already qualified for it, and in that case it goes to the league, depending on which league they're in. Chaos all around, and that's from the restructure of the CONCACAF Champions League in 2024. So when that happens, Mexico, the CONCACAF Champions League will then go up to 27 teams in 2024. Mexico will then have 6 more qualifying places. So that is the winners and the runners-up of both the Apertura and the Clausura tournaments, plus the next best teams in the aggregate table. So if the top 2 in both of those tournaments, or the finalists in both of those tournaments, are the same team, you'll get 4 from the aggregate table. If they're completely different teams, you'll get 2. You might even get 3 in the middle. So basically, that they qualify for the Champions League. For the 2023 Champions League, that is the first one that you'll get to if you're not one of the teams already in it at the moment. There's a total of 4 qualifying places for Mexico. Obviously, there's no Leagues Cup that features into this, so it's just the 4 finalists from the 2 tournaments, unless one of the teams appears in the final twice, and then it goes to the aggregate table and fills the remaining slots. It all makes sense, right? No? Well, hopefully it does, because I've got nothing else. I can't explain it any further. What I haven't explained as well is that there's 2 tiers. So the Liga MX is the top tier, the Liga de Expansion MX is the second tier, but there isn't any relegation and promotion in the first season. Makes sense, right? So due to the pandemic, the former second tier was the Liga Ascenso MX. That was disbanded and basically replaced by the Liga de Expansion. And this is basically to stabilise Mexican football to make sure there's a second tier. And this project means that there's no relegations between the 2 levels, or promotions between the 2 levels, for approximately 6 years. It's not really confirmed anywhere. I'm trying to look around on the internet and I can't really find anything that says anything other than approximately 6 years. But I've simulated an FM23 going forward a year, and it looks like promotion and relegation opens up for the second season. So there's nothing in the first season, but once you've played the second season, you're either at risk or at potential promotion, depending on which league you're in. But there's only one place, and we'll cover that right now, because once relegation does become available again, it continues to be complicated, unsurprisingly. So, like many South American league systems, with the 2 tournaments per season, there's an aggregated percentage or coefficient or ratio table knocking around as well. So, in Mexico, this looks at the points per game, the ratio of the points per game of each team across the last 6 tournaments. Regular season only, not the Liguera or the playoffs. So that basically covers 3 full seasons of football. So the team that sits at the bottom of that table, it could be a team that's played 1 season, or it could be a team that's played 3 seasons, they will get relegated. And that table's also used to set the fines that are issued by the Mexican Football Federation as well. So the bottom 3 get fined a certain level depending on where they've finished in the table. It's basically reshuffling of prize money, and I'm not really sure why, but basically there's fines in both leagues, and it's based on this ratio table. The Liga de Expansion MX broadly follows the same structure. I'm not going to go through it all again. It's split into a Torneo Apertura and a Torneo Clausura, complete with 12-team Liguillas for each tournament, and then its own Liga de Expansion Campeone de Campeones, which is between the tournament winners. And then there's the same 3-season aggregated percentage or coefficient table that exists, that is used for the calculation of fines, and also eventually determines which team will get promoted to the Liga MX. Right, take a deep breath, because Mexico is very complicated. I think we've covered everything. Let me know if you think I've missed something in the comments, and I'll try and figure it out and get back to you. But that is what I think. We've covered everything in the domestic structure. I'm glad there's only 2 leagues, and I'm glad they follow the same kind of system and structure. So we're going to move on to 5 save ideas for Mexico. So they're going to range from potential Liga MX champions all the way down to sides that are going to be stuck in the second tier for at least a season, which gives you a chance to rebuild them. Right then, let's take a look at 5 save ideas for Mexico. The first club that we are going to look at is the current reigning Campeone de Campeones, champions of champions, after winning both the Torneo Apertura and Clausura in the 21-22 season, and that is Atlas FC from Guadalajara. Now, the club tasted their first success in the 1950s and then went through a 70-year drought, but then became the team to be in the playoffs last season. They finished 2nd and 3rd, I believe, in the 2 tournaments in the regular season, but they came through both sets of playoffs to become bicampeones, which is back-to-back champions. So they've won both tournaments in the same season, which doesn't happen that often in Mexico. Their season, however, wasn't without massive controversy, because if you recall, back in March, or was it June, sometime earlier this year, there was a huge riot in a game away at Querétaro, which was massive, and eventually resulted in the Querétaro fans being barred from games for up to a year. So basically, your challenge is with Atlas to avoid that controversy and continue taking that club to further glory. So you've got the Champions League to look forward to, and the defense of 2 titles within one single season. Now, at the time of recording this, we've already had the Apertura for the 2022 season, 22-23 season, sorry, and they didn't win it. That was won, however, by CF Pachuca, who took their 7th ever title in Mexico. And this is a club that spent the first 90 plus years of their history in relative mediocrity. Now, Los Tuzos have been one of the most successful clubs in Mexico over the last 25 years. They've taken 7 domestic titles and 5 CONCACAF Champions League victories. And they also won the Copa Sudamericana when Mexican sides could play in the South American competitions. So what your task is here, obviously you've got Atlas, they're a task to do. With Pachuca, you've got to take the reins of one of Mexico's most successful sides in recent history and immediately replicate their success by winning the opening tournament of the first season on the game. That will be their 7th title if you manage to do that. And then you've got to build on that and build on their Champions League victories as well and make them the most successful club in Mexican history. And obviously we can't talk about Mexico's most successful clubs without mentioning Club America. Now, this is the team with the most titles in the league's history. They've got 13. And not only do the Aguilas, or the Eagles, have the record for Liga MX titles, or Mexican titles, they also hold the record for CONCACAF Champions League with 7 victories as well to their name. Now, unsurprisingly, a team with such a history and so many victories and titles to their name, they've got many rivals. Their games against UNAM, Chivas and Cruz Azul are all massive rivalries and huge games on the schedule, so you won't go long throughout the season without having a massive derby and rivalry game that you must win to please your fans. Now, Club America have won 2 of the last 3 regular season tournaments, so they sit comfortably at the top of the aggregated points table, but they've not converted that regular season performance into playoff success and therefore a title since 2018. That's your challenge. Take this obviously great side with a huge history and extend their records out of reach from everyone else in Mexico, and that's both the Liga MX and the Champions League. That is your task. For the final 2 teams, we're going to drop down to the Liga de Expansión MX, which we haven't covered in as massive detail as Liga MX, but it's pretty much the same. 18 teams, similar format, split in half. We've covered that. Now we're going to look at Atlante FC. Now, Los Potros del Hierro are former 3-time Mexican champions, and they've won 2 CONCACAF Champions Leagues as well, but they've been in the second tier, and whatever guise the second tier's been in, since 2014. They have, however, won the Liga de Expansión MX Torneo Apertura, I'll get my tongue around that in a second, in both the 21-22 and the current 22-23 seasons. So they're well placed on that coefficient ratio points table aggregated thing to return to the top flight once promotion and relegation resumes. You just need to make sure you stay up there and keep that aggregated points position at the top of the table by the time you get to the end of season number 2. And they are obviously a former big club with plenty of history, and they're well placed as a side for you to take back to the top of Mexican and North American football. Now, the final side we're looking at is a bit of a complicated one. It's going to be Leones Negros from Universidad Guadalajara. Now, UDG, I think is how you... UDG have a storied history. I think that's what they're called. They've won the 1978 CONCACAF Champions Cup, which was the precursor to the Champions League. But since then, they've sort of been on a bit of a mixed boat, a bit of a decline. There was alleged questionable financial dealings in the early 90s, and that ultimately led for the club, at least the first team of the club, to be sold in 1994 to the Mexican Football Federation, which led to a resizing of the leagues and a restructure, a creating of a new second tier and all sorts of chaos. I don't know how selling a club to the Football Federation does that. Something to do with licensing and franchising, I'm not really sure. Let me know if you know in the comments. But basically, the years since the mid-90s have been a bit confusing. I've been trying to get my head around them, but from what I can tell, the reserve team that wasn't sold to the Football Federation became the first team, and then that was sold and then came back to Guadalajara and eventually was renamed to UDG again, and they found themselves somehow back in the top flight after a load of investment in 2015. They stayed in Liga MX for one season, and were relegated again, back to the Ascenso MX, and have remained in the second tier since. And then once the League of the Expansion MX was created in 2022, obviously they remained in the second tier. They're kind of up and down the league as well. It's quite chaotic. But the club have got a very confusing history, as covered by this last 90 seconds of me trying to explain it. But for 45 years on from their Champions Cup victory, now might be the time for you to take over and rebuild them and take them back to the top, claim domestic glory, win the North American Champions League, restore order to Leones Negros. And if you've got any idea what's happening with their history, let me know in the comments below. And there we have it. That was a whistle-stop, somehow, tour of the playable Mexican leagues on Football Manager 2023, along with 5 great save ideas for you to try out. If you are at all familiar with real-life Mexican football and the league system, and I've completely butchered it in this explanation, please let me know in the comments down below. Every day is a school day. If you've managed in a Football Manager, either 2023 or any other version, again, let me know your experiences in Mexico and your history there and your stories about managing in Mexico in the comments. Share your thoughts. And then, whilst you're there, remember to like the video, obviously. Subscribe to the Sort It Out SI channel if you haven't already. And check out more of our league guides, which are going to appear after my face has disappeared in about 3 seconds' time. And all of the other great content here on the channel. I've been Anders, and I'll see you on the next one. Thanks a lot for watching.